Yo, this is just an intro in case xehther does not hook me up, but welcome back to another video, guys. I'm excited for this shit. xehther threatened to beat my ass if I didn't cook with this, so, I gotta cook with it. The story begins at Izuku being 7 years old and severely ill in the hospital. The doctors don't actually understand what is going on with him. However, Izuku's not getting more sick than he already is, but he isn't getting better either. It's like his body's in a state of, constant flux that balances itself out, almost. Doctors think it may be a quirk effect saving his life. And when it comes for the doctor to actually check this fact, they're really confused. They genuinely do not understand what is occurring. That's when Izuku looks over and looks at us saying, "Have you read the Deadpool comics?" The doctors ask, "Who are you talking to?" But he says, "I'm not talking to anyone." But that's when they do some more tests and they realize something insane about Izuku. That his entire body is just filled with cancer cells. However, every time a cell dies, it gets replaced with more cancer cells. However, it isn't ruining his physical appearance in this timeline. I don't really want to do that. I think that'd be a little boring-ish. But he looks normal. He's just constantly sick, basically. And it's just not allowing Izuku to die. The doctors are actually calling this Izuku's quirk the dying factor, because it's just replacing every cell in his body with cancerous ones on repeat. But it's not allowing him to die, because every time a cancerous cell dies, it gets replaced with a new cancerous cell. And they actually realized and mentioned to Inko that it's possible that Izuku might be immortal due to his quirk. And honestly, Izuku's really sad about this, because that means eventually her Izuku will be alone. There's no way for him to, keep everyone around with him forever. And they also mentioned that they believe that this dying factor is actually what his quirk is. His quirk is the regenerating cancer cells. And they think it's really sad. His quirk is just a dying factor. Inko is even more shocked knowing that there's nothing the doctors can actually do for Izuku, and she just takes him home. As I said prior, this is a side note, Izuku does look normal. Outside looks fine. His insides look dead. Not insane yet. Izuku ends up informing his class about what his quirk is. However, it ends up with a mixed reaction. Some think he's weird, while others think he's awesome. And Bakugo actually kind of respects Izuku in this timeline, because his best friend's quirk is immortality. That's called the dying factor. How cool is that? Anyways, we'll time skip, but I do want to note that during the years, he's gotten several injuries, such as heel. There was actually a point where he got his hand caught in a conveyor, like at the grocery store, and he actually lost the hand, and it grew back in the matter of a few days. And that's when they realized that it was more than just immortality. He heals super fast, too, due to all of his cells being immediately replaced. And so, Inko is still scared to knowing what Izuku's future entails, but everybody else, including Izuku, is kind of like, this is awesome. Izuku, being in his constant state of sickness, eventually got used to it, and it just doesn't bother him anymore. So he just moves on from it and just lives his life like normal. Eventually, we get to, the being 14, the teacher going, "Here's a career aptitude test," and then he throws it away going, "I know you all want to be heroes," and then goes on to yap about everybody's business. Yeah, I thought that was kind of annoying. Why would you yap about a bunch of your students' business? It's none of their business. But anyways, he then mentions that Izuku and Bakugo plan on both going to UA, and that's when Izuku and Bakugo both fist bump. And the class does still remain divided till this day, because Izuku is constantly dying. It's like a weird quirk, and others are like, Izuku is super fucking awesome. But either way, they do end up deciding to go to UA together. And that's when they're going underneath the bridge, and Izuku ends up getting caught by the sludge villain, but Bakugo doesn't. But there's nothing Bakugo can do. He tries to explode at the sludge villain and everything, but it just didn't cause anything. And eventually Izuku does suffocate. But he doesn't actually die, because he can't die, right? So, even though Izuku is suffocated, when All Might saves him, he's perfectly fine. And All Might's kind of like, huh? How's this possible? And that's when Bakugo actually explains for Izuku, because Izuku's still, like, catching his breath, basically. And Bakugo's like, he can't die. And All Might's like, what? Fascinating. And so All Might actually is kind of interested in this, but he ends up just signing their books and continuing on. That's when Izuku and Bakugo actually end up splitting ways. Bakugo heads towards the city, Izuku heads towards his home. But that's when, like, 5 minutes later, he actually hears, like, a bunch of commotion. He runs towards the city, like, kind of curious about what's going on. And that's when he notices the sludge villains escape, and there's a bunch of explosions. And that's when he realizes it's Bakugo. Bakugo got caught by a sludge villain, and Izuku's like, how could All Might? And Izuku's just like, it doesn't matter, and he just immediately sprints in, you know, like Canon Izuku goes to try and save Bakugo, but he doesn't have any sort of super strength or anything like that, so there's nothing he could really do for Bakugo. Eventually, you know, Bakugo gets saved by All Might because the sludge villain is trying to fight off Izuku and take over Bakugo's body, and All Might, realizing how heroic Izuku is, saves them. You know, and things remain relatively canon up until when All Might actually stops Izuku and offers him his quirk, like in canon. And All Might points out that he's like, you're immortal, which means you would be the final wielder unless you eventually decide to give this quirk away. But the one thing, the biggest reason why I'm giving Izuku One for All is a secret. So anyways, Izuku then goes on to train with All Might for the next 10 months, and he actually asks All Might if Bakugo can train with them, and All Might agrees. All Might originally was very hesitant, but Izuku explained to All Might, Bakugo is his best friend, and he's going to tell Bakugo about it anyway. I'd also like to point out that All Might kind of just gave Izuku the hair, like, 4 months in, because Izuku wasn't, like, tiny either. Like, he was decently built, but it only took a few months for him to get built enough to actually withstand One for All's power. And with him being immortal, it doesn't really matter anyway, but All Might didn't want him to explode regardless. And so the training continues for the rest of the time skip, and Bakugo, Izuku, All Might, they're all training. All Might really training Izuku and Bakugo, but it's the same thing in the end. So after the 10-month training arc, they then go to UA's entrance exams. And these exams are honestly great for them. Because even though they're not put together, that 10 months of training has made Bakugo significantly stronger than he was in canon, and Izuku as well. Like, by the point this training is over, Izuku, I would say, is able to use, like, 45 to 50% without any, you know, pushback. And since it doesn't really matter if he breaks his body, he can use 100%. Just, he doesn't really want to feel that pain 24/7 every time, if that makes sense. And so Izuku, he mainly uses like 45 to 50%. Izuku doesn't mutter like he did in canon, stuff like that. Like the canonical stuff where Ida starts tweaking out at everybody. President Mike shuts him down, and then it's basically like that. And so then we skip to Izuku being at the gate for the UA entrance exams, and he's trying to go over to Uraraka because she looks extremely nervous and he wants to comfort her. However, you know, Ida has to be on his high horse, you know, telling Izuku, oh yeah, you can't go distract that girl since you can't do it anything on your own. Bruh. Fuck Ida. Honestly, fuck that guy. Side rant, he is so annoying, bro. I don't care what anybody says. I wish Stain had stabbed him with that sword, bro. I fucking wish. Anyways, continuing. After Izuku ignores Ida and just goes over to Uraraka, tries to comfort her, yo, this is just an exam. I'm sure you'll do great. I believe in you, you know? Kind of helping Uraraka relax a little bit. Izuku, as soon as the doors open, toggles not even the full 45 to 50% he can use without any drawbacks. He just takes it like 10%, and he's like keeping up with Ida. And he's just gone, bro. He starts boxing up all the robots, destroying them one by one, wombo comboing them. And honestly, he does pretty well for himself. Eventually, we get towards the end where, you know, the 0-pointer comes out, and Izuku's just like, I don't need to fight that. So he's walking back, because he doesn't feel a need to run either. And that's when he hears Uraraka screaming for help, much like in canon. And he immediately turns around, uses 45%, runs straight back, takes off the rubble, takes to a rocket, and sprints back to the entrance, you know. Nothing drastic, nothing dramatic. It wasn't crazy. It was pretty basic stuff, honestly. But that's what happens when your MC is really strong from the beginning. So after that, you know, Izuku is basically told by the teachers before he even goes home that he's 100% in UA. And when he's gone home, he calls Bakugo and they talk and they're both like, yeah, we definitely got in, blah, blah, blah. He even tells Bakugo about how the teachers themselves told him he was in, and Bakugo was kind of jealous. But other than that, nothing really crazy happens over the next 2 weeks. All Might's been busy, so he hasn't been able to train Izuku and Bakugo, but they've been training with each other. In this timeline, Izuku gets the ball in the Quirk apprehension test, because things are basically the same as canon, honestly, so I'm just skipping to this Quirk apprehension test because I don't want to yap about all that. So at the Quirk apprehension test, Izuku gets thrown the ball, and he puts all, like, 100% one for all into it, and he throws it full force. And you just see his arm just get destroyed. And Aizawa's like, why would you do that? And Izuku's like, you said don't hold back, didn't you? He's like, if it's going to destroy your body, yes, hold back. Izuku's like, well, the thing is, a part of my quirk, you know, makes me very good at healing. So when Aizawa actually looks back down, Izuku's arm is just already entirely healed. You couldn't even tell it was damaged to begin with. And so Aizawa is just like mind-boggled. He's like, what? Excuse me? It says here his quirk is super strength, because during this 10-month time skip, I forgot to mention, All Might and Nezu had decided to hide the information about Izuku actually being immortal. So nobody knows it except for like All Might, Nezu, and like some very important figures. Outside of them, nobody really knows at this point. His classmates would know, but like they're not telling everybody and their mom, so it doesn't really matter. Fuck his old classmates, bro. Who cares? Anyways, so Aizawa's mind boggled, but he just moves on for now because he's like, I'll talk to the principal about this after. And yeah, it just continues on with the test. Bakugo in this timeline actually ends up getting 930 with his throw because he's been training for 10 months with All Might and Izuku. If he doesn't do like way better, there's bigger problems. I'm gonna be honest. But overall, Izuku gets first place, Bakugo gets second, and the rest, you know, just in a random order. I don't like Momo, I'm gonna be honest, so she gets like 12th, if it was by my opinion. Anyways, so after the Quirk apprehension test, Aizawa actually goes to the principal and asks him, he was like, I saw something very weird today. Izuku shattered his arm, and it just healed, and Nezu kind of just holds his head. He's like, oh my. And then he proceeds to explain to Aizawa that Izuku is actually immortal. He cannot die. Like, even if, like, he was basically nearly atomized, he still wouldn't die. You could set him on fire. You could destroy 99.9% of his body with a atomic atom destroyer or some shit. Izuku can heal from 0.1 of his body. Like, you would have to destroy everything of him if you want him to actually die. And Aizawa's like, really? What's his strength quirk? And Nezu's like, that I cannot tell you about, but yeah, so that's Izuku's real quirk, is immortality. And Aizawa's honestly kind of hyped about it. And since it's actually a mutation quirk, and Nezu actually explained to Aizawa that if he disabled Izuku's quirk, nothing would happen, and even if I did enable Aizawa to be able to turn off his quirk, it would make Izuku basically die on the spot. So either way, I'm not going to do this shit. So Izuku can then, you know, do basically his thing. His classmates were also confused about his whole arm fiasco, but they never really get a straight answer because Izuku was told not to tell anyone. And so Izuku kind of just keeps it to himself. Bakugo does as well, even though he does know the truth, obviously. And so They go home, and then the next day, they have the heroes versus villains training. And this time, it is exactly the same as canon. Izuku and Uraraka versus Bakugo and Ida. And so in this, Izuku and Bakugo have such a strong bond, and they have such a desire to fight each other because they're genuine rivals, even in spite of their friendship. Like, there's no sort of, like, dislike between the two. And so Izuku ends up looking at Uraraka and telling Uraraka to just head up the stairs. Him and Bakugo are going to duke it out. Izuku only toggles, like, 15% because if he hit, like, Bakugo with, like, 100% or, like, 90%, he would still kill Bakugo. But they've made an agreement where it's up to, like, whatever Izuku can do without any sort of drawback that counts for their, like, competitions and stuff. So Izuku will never go, like, 100%, even though he can heal it, against Bakugo. And Bakugo kind of fucks with this. So they kind of just both start off on the lighter side, Izuku using, like, 10% and Bakugo using, like, 17 to 20% of his power. And they just start duking it out, giant explosions. Izuku just, punching a wall, running through the wall so he gets out of the way, stuff like that. And they have a really fun fight, but in the end, it was not gonna happen where Bakugo would actually beat Izuku. It's just impossible because Izuku is immortal. And so Bakugo, knowing that obviously he can't actually defeat Izuku, is content with how that fight has gone. He's like, I did well, I'm content. And that's when Izuku just wraps the white ribbon around his arm. And Bakugo's considered out. He proceeds to then run upstairs and help out Uraraka, and they touch the bomb. Momo then tells everybody that Ida did the best in all of the heroes versus villains because he embraced what it was to be a villain. Izuku and Bakugo, they more had fun with the rivalry than paid attention to what they were actually supposed to be doing. And Uraraka didn't really do anything, unfortunately. And Uraraka kind of was hurt by this, but, like, it wasn't meant to be any sort of offensive towards Uraraka. And Momo says that. It's like, I don't mean to, like, insult you or anything, but, like, you didn't really do anything. At least Ida embraced his role as a villain. But, like, you just kind of ran up a few stairs. I mean, that's all it was. And Uraraka would accept this, and she would, decide that she's going to train harder from now on. Anyways, that's the end of the heroes versus villains. They end up, going home with permission slips. They get it all signed, And then a week from then, they go to the USJ. And so when they're on the bus to USJ, everybody asks Izuku, like, how did his arm heal? And Izuku continues to just, kind of divert the subject, weaning around it, trying to avoid having to talk about it. And Aizawa is honestly kind of helping Izuku as well as Bakugo because obviously they all realize that this is a secret that people aren't really supposed to know. And so eventually they make it to the USJ, they go inside. 13 goes on that long ass rant that nobody cares about. And that's when Izuku notices in the middle of the field there's like a purple mist and villains coming out. And Kirishima notices it right after Izuku is just like, wait, you got us fake villains too? And Aizawa's like, no, those aren't fake, those are real. And from here on, things remain relatively canon. Up until when the Nomu is actually about to attack Aizawa, Izuku manages to arrive in time to stop the Nomu from actually destroying Aizawa's face. And he used like 90% of One For All, like hurting his arm severely to catch the Nomu's arm, but it healed immediately, as you know. And that's when eventually Aizawa manages to get back up and handle the villains. And Aizawa, understanding that if Izuku's left to deal with the Nomu, even if he can't beat it, he can hold it off. Even though Aizawa doesn't like this fact and this idea of letting Izuku handle it, he has no real other choice. Otherwise, he might die and other students may once he dies. And that's a really iffy situation for Aizawa, so he opts to let Izuku fight the Nomu alone. And Izuku, he's having a rough time. He's getting the shit beat out of him. And eventually Izuku starts just using 100% of One For All. But he ends up letting up a little bit for 1 second. And that's when everybody notices the Nomu caught Izuku off guard. and is punching at full force. And unfortunately, this punch goes straight through Izuku's stomach. And everybody except, like, Bakugo is truly horrified. Because Aizawa knows Izuku is immortal, but, like, hasn't seen any sort of, like, injury that, like, had him, like, get used to it. And all the classmates didn't know this. So, like, most of the classmates just realized that Izuku, or like, Izuku's dead. He's done. And Izuku takes advantage of this. Even though he's, like, spitting up blood, he does take advantage of the fact that the Nomu just punched through his stomach to hold his fist there. And he just starts taking a beating. Now, I mean, he's taking a beating. Eventually, Aizawa manages to, disable a couple of the Nomu's quirks. And that's when Izuku manages to get his opportunity to get the Nomu out of him, pause, and start unleashing a barrage of 100% punches. Full force, beating the shit out of the Nomu, eventually sending it flying out of the USJ. And Shigaraki's like, what? How is he still alive? And Kurogiri, understanding that this is not a good situation they are currently in, before All Might even arrives, he takes Shigaraki and gets out of there. Because he understands that they're not going to win this fight. Not today. And so they end up leaving the USJ and returning to the bar. The heroes end up arriving, doing cleanup. His entire class now knows the truth, and they're told to make sure it stays secret. Of course, that doesn't remain because obviously Aoyama snitches. But yeah. Anyways, 21 minutes and 47 seconds. I do not think is a bad point to end off this What If. I appreciate anybody who's come in for this first part. It is 12 o'clock at night, so I'm going to have to do this thing called sleep because I have work tomorrow morning. So I hope you all enjoy this part, and leave a like and subscribe, and I'll see you all next time. Peace.